welcome in everyone as folks come in to this Practice Management Talks. Julie Smith and Will Hill here, and we are excited to be with you today. Julie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Um, I think we got to have a little bit of a question of the day. I know that Gary's not introing us, but I still feel like we need to do it. And so my question to you, Julie, is which fake spring is your favorite fake spring?
The last one for sure.
The, the last one. All right.
It is
To the
daylight
folks
savings
watching from
time this
this,
weekend.
it is. It is. You're not really saving much. You're kind of losing it. But,
I know.
if you guys want to debate about the validity of ongoing daylight savings time changes, please hit up chat rooms all across the internet. I'm sure they're starving for that content from you, but we'll let that go for now. But anyways, Julie, it's good to be here with you, and we're going to talk a little bit about the power of internal communications
Yeah.
today. And by we, I mean, hey, look, there's a slide with my stuff on it. So if you are newer to Practice Management Talks, my name is Will Hill. Been around the industry for a while. Love working with firms and really living at the intersection of people and process to help firms move forward past where they are stuck or where they want to go to. And of course, I'm joined by Julie. Julie, say something that's already on the screen about yourself.
I love that intersection of people and processes. That's new for you. Or the first time I actually listened. I don't know. One
Thanks
of
for
the
paying
two.
attention, Julie. I appreciate it.
So my name's Julie, and I, enjoy conversing with Will on people and processes at that intersection for sure. And I'm a manage Harper and Company, do Sulik Consulting, a little podcast, a little this, a little of that, and my why is obviously those two little girls in that picture. So
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, hey, let's jump into internal communications. I have yet to meet a firm that has told me, man, we got this nailed down 100% of the time, right? I think it's impossible to nail down 100% of the time, Julie.
yeah, no, I agree.
And so, but I think what's important though is that we look at what are we trying to achieve with our internal communications, and we think about being intentional with those communications and on purpose. Um, as we look at a few things on the screen here about why they often fail, um, you know, common frustrations. And we're gonna dig into these a little bit here, I guess, but we're gonna look at common frustrations. You know what? Let me just jump to that slide. Common frustrations.
Let's
Why don't
do it. It's
let's
Friday.
let's let's do that. It's a Friday when we're doing this, and I said let's jump to common frustrations, and then I went right to a slide that says the importance of effective internal communications. So clearly, I'm on my game today, Julie. We did not
Well,
communicate very well about this internally, did we?
I think that the effective internal communications is why there is that frustration, right? So
Mm,
look at things like, how are you doing those communications? What does that look like? Is it indeed effective with your team? Because I think oftentimes, and I don't know you will, but I see firm leaders just send out an email because they have incurred a pain point, right? And they want to share that with their team. And it's not, it's an email, there's emotion attached with it. It creates some, everybody's like, well, is that me? Well, why am I getting this? What's happening? And then there's no follow-up. There's no conversation after that. There's nothing, in regards to that. So it's like creates this eggshell event, which, as we all know, is terrible for your culture, right? Well, and I think
yeah.
that's where some of that frustration leads into. And I think, I think the number one thing that I see sometimes when I go into a firm is it is every person's in their cubicle, in their office, or what have you. They're working from home, and there's not oftentimes that time to converse and have that debrief about whatever has happened in the week or the month. And so sometimes I think sending out emails or using that medium is great, right? It's effective. Everybody gets to do it in their own time, or Teams or Slack. But I think what they're missing sometimes is that team meeting to go back and say, hey, listen, here's why that email was shared. Let me better explain that and answer any questions that you may have, or how can I help with this, or how can I, just asking those really important questions. We sometimes forget that in person, bringing everyone together, getting everybody on the same page, everybody hearing it the same way, sometimes is the most important part of internal communications.
Yeah. And when we think about why people are frustrated with internal communication, let's step back and say the fact that frustration exists means that it is important. It means that there's something there to be achieved, whether it's the things you see on the screen, the culture builder, performance booster, retention, and part of the community that's there. There are things with internal communication that are really critical. And I think everybody knows that. And that's why we get frustrated. And when we come in and we say, all right, I'm just trying to go through. We see these pitfalls. Right now we're in it, right? We're going live here in March. It's busy season. Most obvious comment I'll make today, perhaps, right now. And so we get in this place of there's no time. I feel rushed. I just got to do this. I can't put thought behind it. Oh, people will understand. They know we're all busy. And then we just start going to whatever's in our easy button bag of tricks, the email, the quick fire, all those things that we do that just create more problems rather than actually achieve what we're trying to do with the communication. And for me, when I think about how do we move through, and I want to sit on this next slide for a little bit about the strategies for effective communication. As I feel like this is probably the most important component of what we've got today, Julie, is that we have to ask ourselves with every single communication, what am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to achieve? And by and large, we can only achieve one thing at a time. We can only achieve one thing at a time. And so when we talk about clear messaging, how do we message clearly if I'm trying to communicate three different things in a single email or a single internal chat message that goes on? That's really hard to do, if not impossible, right? And so I would rather say, what am I trying to achieve? And then focus on the tool, the timing, the audience, all those kind of things. I want to talk about audience a little bit, but let me let you respond, Julie, to what I'm talking about here.
No, and I think you're onto something, and I think oftentimes we go and we're sending these emails or these Teams messages or what have you, and I think if we could just take a moment and sit with what are we trying to achieve, it would really help clear up that message because you may be angry in the moment, you may, whatever whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, it's like, okay, what's the end goal? What do I want? Do I need this person's buy-in? Well, how am I going to get that person's buy-in if I'm attacking them, right? Or if I'm sending a strong message that doesn't bode well with them. And so it's really thinking about what, especially as leaders, what are we trying to get out of our team that we need back in order to achieve a bigger goal, right? And I think that's where it becomes really starting with that end in mind and not getting, just happy on that keyboard and start typing, just really thinking that through. And I think it's a sometimes I think that's a learned thing that you go through. You see, I don't want to say the young generation come through here, and some of the emails I get and I'm like, oh, they didn't think that through, or they didn't understand the impact that message is going to have. And then almost all the messages thereof that we have to, what is that going to do for everybody here on the team? And so I think that's exactly correct. And you got to start with what are you trying to achieve? What do you need out of whatever message you're sending? One. And two, I always say, is it worth it? And sometimes I think, when we talk about clear messaging, is how many times have you misinterpreted an email or a tone of an email or what's being said? And so thinking through, like, hey, if this is do I need to pick up the phone and have this conversation because it may come through not slightly, different than how I'm intending, which then creates the whole, if you have effective communication, you get some of your time back, right? Well,
Yeah. And there's The opposite of what am I trying to achieve, I would posit, is what am I trying to avoid? And so the problem is when we approach communication, even subconsciously, at a what am I trying to avoid mentality, we end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I'm going to send an email because I don't want to hear Julie whine again about another process change. I'm sick of it, so I'm just going to send this email. The problem is oftentimes Julie whines because there's not good context. And so we try to hurry up and move past this message so Julie doesn't whine, not realizing that her whining is driven from lack of context. And so the very thing we're trying to avoid, we actually create with how we communicate, whether it be um, the mode or medium that we think about, or the audience that we're looking at. So it is super important to think about what am I trying to achieve, because the opposite of that is what am I trying to avoid. And when we go down that road, we end up making poor choices with our communication. I said I wanted to talk about audience for a minute, Julie, and I think sometimes in smaller firms, this isn't as big of a deal, right? We got 3 or 4 folks in the firm. We're communicating pretty much everything with everybody as to what's going on. But as your firm grows in terms of staff count, I think we have to be willing to separate our audience and send the same message multiple times to different layers of the audience. So if we're making a change that affects the administrative team greatly, I may want the most level of detail to the administrative team, but they interface with everybody else in our firm. And so we may have their ire up a little bit because of this change. They may feel pressure or may not have as much time to go chase other things down from clients because of another change going on for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I want to make sure I'm communicating with everybody. Hey, here's something going on right now. It's going to affect the admin team while they get heads down. I don't need to share the detail with everybody. The admin team needs to see it because they're part of it, right? So I just want to think a little bit, especially as our firms start to grow in size, about being willing to split the audience and share, effectively try to communicate the same thing 2 times. But again, my purpose is different. Hey, professional staff, I want you to have some grace with the admin team and pick up your own slack for a little while because they're going to be heads down for 2, 3 weeks. Admin staff, here's what we're going to be on heads down for 2, 3 weeks in detail, right? So 2 separate purposes of what I'm trying to achieve, focus message to each of those audiences as we go. So I just think that thinking about the audience is a critical part of this effective communication as well.
And I think another kind of what you said to build on that too is effective communication comes from listening too, right? So if, like you said, if you don't want to send me something because I'm consistently whining, well, there's probably a reason. So we need to dig into that and listen because it's probably not just me who feels that way. It's, across the board, but also looking, like you said, at how are you doing the messaging to each of those groups? Because
Mhm.
oftentimes if you can listen to their complaints or they're whining, I guess, as you put it. There's usually a reason, and you can usually diffuse that real fast by just listening and then having that effective communication in return.
Right, right. And thinking about how I want a response. Is this just simply to inform? Is it to get quick feedback? Is it to exchange and debate ideas? Is it to educate? Those are items that really help us drive. Do we need a meeting for this? I think some folks meeting themselves to death and they realize, oh, I could have, I'm not looking for exchange here. I just need to inform. So if we're just trying to inform, what's our real path of communication when we're just informing? If I want exchange, if I want opportunity for questions, maybe I don't want email. Maybe I do want to actually call a meeting, and there's going to be value in that because I want to encourage that. And again, to the point of consistency, if we behave consistently with the mode of communication that we choose, that's going to help set the right tone as well for our team members in what they can expect out of the meeting or why it was an email instead of a meeting or something along that particular line there. let
One
me
more
move
thing
in. Yeah, do it,
one
do it.
more thing before we go into that. I think it's really important that you kind of educate your team in regards to what they can expect. I think oftentimes you've got, maybe the admin team is using Teams to communicate because it's quick and effective, and maybe your accounting department is just consistently using email or what have you. And so really defining what communication mode do you want to use and for what really helps set that expectation for that effective communication in regards to what medium you're going to be using internally. I think that education is really important because we can assume as firm leaders that everyone can figure that out, right? And we just cannot assume that because people struggle. They're like, oh, should I send an email? Should I send a Slack? Is this a Teams thing? Do I need to go talk? Like, really just put that system and process together as to what is your expectation. And I think
Mhm.
that really eliminates some of those errors, right? So is everybody looking at Teams throughout, like, everybody, so if everybody understands that they need to have that up and that's the expectation, and it's, needs to be a pretty quick response unless you're on a call, people understand that. But if you don't have that expectation in your firm of what that communication looks like, I've seen where the accounting team is mad at the admin team because they're using Slack or Teams, or, I'm just using an example. And they're like, I don't have that up. I'm just looking at my email. Well, and the admin team is like, well, I only look at email once, every couple hours. I always have Slack or Teams or whatever your mode of communication is. And it's like, oh, wait, you guys are not talking about the expectation of how you're going to communicate. And so I think
Mhm.
that's really important. Seems like common sense, but I've seen it so many times where it's just communicate how you're going to communicate, right?
Yeah, yeah. And even whether it's the small stuff or even bigger transitions, communication's such a critical role and an enabler of the right kind of change. Talk us through a little bit here as it shows on the slide, maybe a case study for a couple of minutes on Harper and Company and some of the communication transformation.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, there was really no communication, definitely not external. Internal was done on an as needed basis, not on a proactive basis. And kind of everybody was kind of, doing their own thing, their own way. And I think, as we come in and see that, we say, okay, we've got to, start working through some of these things. And we do an internal newsletter, if you want to call it Harper's Huddle, every month. So we just want to make sure, hey, these are the things that are upcoming. Here's the expectation. Here are some of the things our clients are talking about. Hey, here's a process on, what we've decided, or here's a template. And just really bringing that 30 days, the past 30 days and the future 30 days kind of together. And it's fun to give, we have a high five section. So who's really hit it out of the park this month, or who did something above and beyond? People love that recognition internally, and everybody knows that that comes out the 15th of every month. We also have an external one to clients, right? So really bringing it together to say, hey, clients, here's the expectations from us as a firm. Here's what we know is going to be affecting you, and just being able to communicate that collectively so everyone's getting the same message. No one here internally is having to pick up the phone 100 times and have the same message over and over again, right? I think that's really
Mhm.
important. I think communication too, it goes from, we've implemented Teams, for instance, and the expectation is Teams is instantaneous. It's something where you need something quickly, that's where you're going to go. So I don't know how many firms out there you have codes, right? We all have codes we need. That's a really great place where it's collectively, you're not sending the email, it's going in there. Whoever
Mhm.
needs it can get it. You're not picking and choosing what that looks like. Email to us is something that requires an action and maybe a thought that needs, it's going to take us more time than typing in the 6-digit code that this person needs in order to complete this task. And I think that's really important. Like I said, in the beginning, it was like people didn't understand what we were using each of those for. And so sometimes those Teams messages wouldn't get answered because like, I'm going to answer that later. They had no system for that, where we found that people normally have a system for their email, is kind of what it has seemed. And I think the other thing is, communication is your brand. And I think we often forget that. And as we have more and more, you're growing and scaling your business, like you said, Will, well, how do you make sure and ensure the same message is getting through with the same, effectiveness essentially? And so it's like, for us, that communication meant like, okay, what can we automate or what can we do to make sure that that brand is really, really consistent through our communication? And so we really, and I know I talked about this last year, but we even have taken it to another level here in 2025. Anything that can be automated is automated now because I know that the client's getting the same exact messaging, but creating, like you said, Will, the system and process to say, okay, you tag the client in this when this happens. Okay, you do
Mhm.
this is where this goes so that that communication is really effective to clients. And we've been able to figure out a system where it can be from certain people at certain times and things like that. But that's where I think that communication for, Harper and Company is really transformed over just the last 10 years is it's consistent. Everyone understands exactly how to effectively communicate and which medium to be using. And I think that really helps um, with that communication, Will.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Awesome. And I think, in a lot of ways, we talk a lot about firm change and working through changing how you communicate is another change in your firm, right? And so we need to look at what are we doing now? Where do we want to go? And then what are the gaps that we've got to bridge there, which would be whether it be around the right channels, the right timing and sequencing, and then what about the education on how we communicate, right? I've run some communication sessions for firms with their team members, and I've yet to find anyone that's like, hey, I took a lot of communication classes and I think heavily about the way I communicate. We just don't until we have these problems that we interface with one another and it comes right back down to, well, so and so said this, or I don't feel heard in this way and I don't understand why. And communication sits at the root of the solution for so many of those things. So don't be afraid to say, hey, we can change the way that we communicate. We've got to just assess what are we doing right now, look at where we want to go. And the winning tools, the winning methods are not insert staff person's name here favorite, right? It's what makes sense for what we're trying to achieve, going right back to what I said early on in our time together. Um, Tools and technologies. What's your thought, Julie, in terms of comparing some of these communication tools that are fairly similar to one
Yeah.
another? Like if we've got multiple internal communication tools, how would you go about kind of assessing which ones make the most sense for a firm?
I mean, I think it comes back to like education. So are people more comfortable with Microsoft or do you have a group of people that have been, using that Slack for, for whatever reason and that's easy because as we know, Will, it's the path of least resistance, right? So what does the majority really feel is good for them? I think it's also about how can you, as firm leaders, how can we maintain and manage that communication, right? So how are you able, teams to me is pretty transparent as the leader of the firm. I can pretty much see almost anything that's kind of going on and if needed, I guess I should say. And I think it's just really it goes down to that path of least resistance. And I do think choosing one, I did see one firm that was using Slack for external communications. So, like, they were actually slacking their clients, but using Teams for internal. And I was like, okay, like I give me the thought process here. They ended up, changing how they were doing that, but it was very confusing for their team members, especially which one they had up, which one they could use, and how that was. So I think really going back to like, make it so it's one, make it so it's easy. And it's that path of least resistance that works for everybody, because then you're going to get everybody's buy in and adoption of that a lot quicker.
Yeah. And as you make these changes, I think the bottom bullet here just bears some verbal repeating of when you make some changes about internal communication, that ought to find its way into your new employee onboarding educational material. and that just having a new hire walk in, oh yeah, well, we just use Teams. Well, wait a minute, hold on, that's not enough. What do we use Teams for? When? Why? What should my expectation be? What is the expectation of me when I get a Teams message versus an email message? These are things that we can start strongly with and start well with our new team members as well once we make these decisions. So, um, your your thought on a key takeaway. What do you
I
think,
think
Julie?
my biggest key takeaway is really, listening to what your internal team is communicating to you and being able to find the most effective way to communicate with them. As we know, everybody's different. And I think, hey, an email, a Teams, being able to understand that. But then you have a few people who may be whiny about the situation. Once you send the email or once you send the Teams, go have the conversation because that's going to be a lot more effective with those people. And I think it's really understanding who your audience is, what your message is, how you want it to be received, and like you said, how to avoid what you don't want. And in regards to that, when you're avoiding what you don't want, doing maybe the harder thing in order to get there. So if it's getting up and having the conversation, just do it. It will save you time in the end.
Yeah. I also I think as folks battle between sending an email versus having a meeting from an internal communication perspective, if you're on the fence about that, one of the areas I've seen some firms do is to say, uh, 2 days before the weekly meeting or 2 days before the monthly meeting, whatever it may be, we're going to send you a note with a few things we want to inform you of. Here's what's going on. Don't forget taxes are due soon. Welcome to our new team member, blah, blah, blah. We're gonna inform them of some items. And then I'm able to shorten the meeting agenda time. And maybe instead of spending 45 minutes going through these things, I'm spending 15 minutes saying, any questions on the informative items from the email that went out, right? And so if I want to have some time for response, but I'm nervous about, you know, burying the meeting agenda, or I want to pull away from doing that, but I'm scared to just rely on email. We can do a little blend. Again, think about what are you trying to achieve, and if it's just information, I can probably go ahead and share an email. If I'm nervous that I don't have a closed loop communication back, bring it into as part of my agenda for the meeting and say, hey, what do you guys have? Any questions on that? So we can't always be afraid to mix those modes in there
Mhm.
either. So,
Yeah.
Julie, how does a half hour go by so fast?
I know, we always have so much to we could keep going, but
We
everybody I'm
could.
sure wants lunch. It's Friday. We're both
It
here and
is
happy to
Friday.
answer any questions you may have, or if we can assist in any way that you can find, how to reach us. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll speak again soon. We're looking forward to the next Practice Management Talks. Appreciate Insightful Accountant for having us on.